Thanks, Lascian Corla. Minister, this is a budget of miserable crumbs that will do nothing to solve the most urgent social crisis that we face in this country, the disaster of housing and homelessness, the chaos in our public health system, and it will do absolutely nothing to deal with the gaping, growing and obscene inequalities in the distribution of wealth and income in our society. One of Minister Donoghue's favourite phrases these days is prudence, how it's so important to be prudent. And I really do feel like quoting back at him the Beatles song of the same name, "Dear Prudence, open up your eyes," because this budget has not opened up its eyes, acknowledged or done anything to deal with the most serious issues facing the people who are suffering most and who need the government's help most. The most obvious example of that is the housing crisis. And really, I don't know where to begin in expressing my anger and frustration at this budget when it comes to dealing with the housing and homelessness crisis. It simply beggars belief that in this budget we have 3,800 directly constructed council houses and approved housing body houses next year to deal with the scale of the crisis we are now facing. 3,800 houses is all that this government can deliver next year for a housing list that has 100,000 families on it, and where we have 8,000 people in emergency accommodation. It's just unbelievable. And that is nothing new. That announcement is nothing new. We heard that 3,800 figure after the so-called housing summit about a month ago. So there's no additional funding beyond what we've already had announced, and has already been pointed out by a number of speakers. The total amount of social affordable housing, if you add in refurbishments, is exactly the same as the figure in Simon Coveney's Rebuilding Ireland plan, which we all know has failed and failed disastrously. So there is no serious commitment to significantly increase the amount of directly provided council housing to solve the crisis. But instead, what we get is an additional €150 million to go to HAPS, to the Housing Assistance Payment Scheme. More money into the pockets of private landlords. And a commitment to further expand this mad, failed scheme to the extent of about 80 to 90,000 households over the next 3 or 4 years, such that by 2021 we will be pouring into the pockets of private landlords €800 million to €1 billion a year, every year, instead of that money going into providing and building council houses for the people that need them. So, actually, despite all the rhetoric of how you want to return to social housing, in actuality, the centrepiece, central pillars of the housing plan to deal with this catastrophic housing crisis is to pour more money into the pockets of private landlords. Something that has failed and has robbed the local authorities of the money that they need and should have to build council houses. And then you have LEHAF, another scandal in the making, an additional €75 million of subsidy to go to private developers, purportedly to get back affordable housing. Now, this is incredible. I mean, it's bad enough that you came up with this scheme last year and allocated tens of millions to give to private developers, but the fact that you have expanded it this year really beggars belief, because in the interim, the developers have made it clear they're not going to give us affordable housing for the subsidies that you're going to give them. In my area, Hines, the private developer who NAMA sold the Cherrywood site to, has said they want 300 to 400,000 euro or more for the affordable houses. Now, how the hell are people going to afford those? And that the proportion of the overall development that we're going to get in these affordable houses is miserable in any event. Could be as low as 1%. And you're going to give more money to this. Are you stark raving mad? Or are you just addicted to subsidising your private developer friends? And now, as if LEHAF and HAPS isn't bad enough, you've come up with a new scheme to subsidise the private developers called the Housing Building Finance Initiative. Another name with a conveniently summarisable, what do you call them, acronym? HBFI, which the Minister announced so proudly earlier on, that is going to cooperate with NAMA in giving cheap money to private developers who can't get it off the banks that we bailed out, because those banks that we bailed out are only worried about the bottom line. So now that the banks that we bailed out won't lend money to the private developers, we, the people, are going to give them cheap loans so that they can build housing on public land that local authorities are going to hand over to them on 800 different sites. Then they are going to build on those houses, on that land, when they feel like it, and then they're going to sell the houses back to the local authorities and make a profit on it. You couldn't make this stuff up. It's a wholesale larceny of public land and public money to enrich private developers, property speculators and landlords, and we're paying again and again and again. The mafia couldn't make this stuff up. And meanwhile, the misery of human beings will continue. Let me give the Minister and the House a news flash on just how bad the housing crisis has escalated in the last couple of weeks. Now, the first element of this housing crisis was people waiting 10 years on a housing list. Now it's up to 20 years. I got an email today from somebody who's on the housing list 20 years. As if that wasn't bad enough, then families are driven into emergency accommodation that is completely unsuitable for them, or into hotels in appalling overcrowding conditions. All of this we know. Guess what the latest is? The latest is all of the family emergency accommodation in Dublin is now full, and all of the hotels are now full. In the last week or two, this is a new development. The hotels we were going to get people out of, forget that. People are looking out to get a hotel. My office spent, with 3 members of staff last week, spent 2 days trying to source 1 hotel room for a young student who has 2 children. Couldn't get it. We couldn't find her a place. Then we get another student who's in the same position. Then this week, we get a mother and father with 5 children, 2 of them toddlers, 3 of them school-going, who have been in homeless accommodation for the last 2 months on a day-to-day basis, right? On a day-to-day basis, with 5 kids, 2 of them babies, 3 of them in school, and every day in the morning they get thrown out of their accommodation, and they don't know where they're going to be that night. They spend the rest of the day trying to phone up numbers where they can't get an answer, or where they're told by the hotels, sorry, we have no accommodation for you. The local authority can do nothing, and they wait then till 4:30 when it's possible to get through to Focus Point, who, in the case of last night, just about managed to get this family a room over their head by 8 o'clock that evening. So for the whole day, Mum and Dad and 5 kids are on the phone just trying to get a roof over their head, a room for their kids for 1 night, and tomorrow morning they'll have to do it all over again. And the next day, and the next day. That's what it's come to. That is what it's come to. And what have you offered to improve this situation? Not a single extra council house. No rent controls. And miserable extra 18 million to homelessness services that won't even begin to deal with the scale of the problem. It is absolutely shocking and unbelievable.